there to seek the truth when it feels like a lie.
In the world of Eos over 2,000 years ago, a terrible plague known as the Star Scourge was ravaging humanity and turning normal men into demons. This tragedy was killing and demonifying myriads of people, and ultimately destroying the world. Two brothers from the Calum household, Ardyn Lucis Calum and Somnus Lucis Calum, both possessed mythical powers. With this power and a resolve to save humanity, it would point each of the Calum brothers in vastly different directions. Ardyn, who wanted to heal humanity by absorbing the demons into himself, sparing the lives of several people, but in turn sacrificing his own humanity. Somnus, who viewed Ardyn's method of compassion as idealistic and unable to move with the urgency required to stop this plague before it was too late, and decided to dispose of everyone who had ever come in contact with the Scourge. This complicated and morally gray conflict is the basis of Final Fantasy XV that was only briefly discussed until we got to fully watch it unfold in episode Ardyn. And out of everything that didn't make it into the main game, this is the most fundamental piece of context. Nothing is either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. This quote from William Shakespeare appears in the first trailer for Final Fantasy Versus 13. The consequence of establishing this alongside the game's inception in our heads was that we were expecting a conflict where the morally correct side wasn't always obvious. Yet in the game, everything is always presented as though we are the absolute good guys and they are the absolute bad guys. And when the development team was asked about Dawn of the Future, one of the things that they mentioned was a great influence for them were the concepts from Final Fantasy Versus 13, which could still fit within 15's story. This influence immediately becomes apparent when you see cuts such as a disguised Ardyn riding through Insomnia, which almost directly mirrors the trailers from the early Versus and 15 days. Even the battle stance that Ardyn and Regis take mirrors that of the long ago teased fight of Noctis and Ravis. It's clear that these themes were brought back and told at the forefront of the story. Being able to see instead of just be told in a very vague manner recontextualized my entire view of Final Fantasy XV's story and made me fall in love with the game all over again. Rather than just being told a simple tale of light and darkness, you find out that there's actually much more complexity underneath. In episode Ardyn, we see a man who is literally saving the world and managed to save the lives of so many people, but he was locked away. His brother Somnus attempted to kill him, but he absorbed so many demons that it literally made him immortal, with the only course of action to erase him from history and imprison him. He was dubbed Adagium, a Latin word meaning to ignore. He would go on to be a hidden secret of the line of Lucius, one that was well kept for over 2,000 years. Niflheim, upon discovering this secret through some ancient text, decided to investigate its validity for themselves, assuming it to only be a myth, but they quickly found out that Adagium was no myth. After demonifying the Infernian and forging the covenant with him, Ifrit gave Ardyn a vision of Somnus and Era, forcing Ardyn to relive the moment of her death all over again. It was at this point that Ardyn completely snapped and was ready to go to Insomnia, where he heard that the souls of the ancient kings still resided in the statues, referred to as the Old Wall. He knew Somnus would be there, and it laid out the perfect path forward for him to extract some sort of revenge by proving his strength over Somnus. Still using his shape-shifting powers, he approached Regis in the form of one of his Crown's Guard, but given his behavior and particular abilities, Regis immediately knew this was the Adagium of Lucian legend. He manages to overcome Regis, kicking him in the chest until he is forced to use the ring and summon Somnus. Ardyn is able to defeat his brother and prove his superiority over him. You're then met with a pitiful ghost of Somnus, not begging for forgiveness, but at least understanding, whatever that means in this context. To finish it all off, Ardyn then plans to kill Regis and end the Lucian bloodline right there. Bahamut then interferes and pulls Ardyn into the crystal. It's at this point he reveals that the gods have repurposed Ardyn to not be a savior of mankind, but one who brings darkness to humanity and spreads the scourge in order to draw out a King of Light. Once the King of Light is born, he will have to sacrifice himself to kill Ardyn, giving him the release of death and the revenge in the form of ending the line of Lucis. You're given the option to resist this fate, but even if you want to protest becoming a sacrificial lamb, in the end, Bahamut will chain Ardyn up and take the form of his beloved fiancée Era. torturing him until the end of time. Ardyn, who wanted nothing more but to save the world, and to do so without having to sacrifice so many lives, who had an undenying love for humanity, was forced with no choice but to spread destruction throughout it. And both Ardyn and Noctis would simply have to become sacrificial lambs just to play a tragic game made up by the gods. While this episode answers so many questions, it also raises so many other ones. We now know with certainty that Ardyn isn't the main villain of Final Fantasy XV, that honor seems to possibly go to Bahamut, which seems to have orchestrated an end to the line of Lucis. But for what purpose? Personally, my theory is that Bahamut, and perhaps some of the other astrals alongside of him, desired to get rid of humanity. Since even the gods themselves weren't immune to the Star Scourge, perhaps they simply needed a king of light to banish the darkness so they could finally once again have dominion over the world. If the gods want to get rid of humanity, they'd simply have to get rid of the line of Lucis first, which is the only force that would have been able to stop them from doing so. If Final Fantasy XIII was a game about defying fate, Final Fantasy Versus 13, versus meaning opposite, was quite possibly about accepting fate. And that theme is still present in Final Fantasy XV. Another thing that piqued my interest is how Era mentioned that she committed a sin by telling Somnus that Ardyn was chosen to be king, as the gods told her not to. Considering Final Fantasy XV and the series at large isn't afraid to stray away from biblical references, is this a reference to the original sin of Eve that brought about man's fall from grace? Or even more so, could this original sin have angered the gods so much that they decided to curse the Lucis Caelum and Fleury bloodlines to meet tragic ends? There are 13 royal arms, and King Regis, who met his untimely end, was the 113th king. Bahamut even explicitly says that everything leading up to the end of the game was already ordained by the gods. This means that the entire conflict was orchestrated by them. So wouldn't that make them the actual villains? I think we know now why episode Noctis' description said that he had a parting of ways with the gods. In either case, this completely recontextualizes the entire story for me, adding a layer of depth that simply wasn't visibly there before. And as curious as I am about how this new Dawn of the Future arc would have transpired, it seems we'll never get that in playable form, at least not anytime soon. Instead, if you're curious why the gods set Noctis and Ardyn to be discarded like pawns in this manner, you'll have to read the Dawn of the Future novel if you want the rest of the story, as all the other DLCs have been cancelled. But episode Ardyn is a fitting end in revealing how much more deeper this conflict actually was, and ultimately it was a tragedy. So Ultima Weapons, did you enjoy episode Ardyn? Who do you think is the true villain of Final Fantasy XV? And more importantly, are you more interested in the Dawn of the Future novel now? Subscribe, click the bell icon, and let me know in the comments below. And if you've been enjoying my content, be sure to check out the Patreon for the Night Sky Prince, where amazing people like Cruz Pisano Jr. are doing their best to help keep this channel going. Shout out to them and the rest of the Ultima community.
Kick out. Come out, Somnus. The longer you wait, the longer he'll
kick him in the... Oh, yeah. Twist it. Oh, he did it. Oh, he passed out. What a... Kick him again. Wake him up.